Hello everyone, I'm Phil Delane, the creator of the Sweet Spot Drumhead. In this video I'm going to explain why having this revolutionary drumhead is so absolutely essential to every drummer, from the beginner to the most experienced. To make this explanation just a little bit easier, I'm going to first talk about another instrument for a few minutes, and that's the guitar. As we all know, the guitar is a very beautiful instrument. All the different sounds it can make are absolutely spectacular. While the fundamental components that allow the guitar to make all these different sounds are the frets that are located on the neck of the guitar. The frets are critically important because they allow the player to be able to find all the notes and then play them with great precision and feeling. So without the frets, the guitar won't nearly sound as good simply because the player will not have a guide to be able to find the best sounds. So with this principle in mind, let's now talk about the instrument that we all love more, and that's the drums. All of the things being held equal, it's actually the sound of the snare drum that defines the sound of the drum set. This should be obvious because the snare drum is the most often used part of the kit. Well, as we all know, if you're a good drummer and your snare drum sounds great, well then guess what? You're going to sound great. But on the flip side, if you're a good drummer and your snare drum doesn't sound good, well then you're not going to sound nearly as good as you deserve to. Like the guitar, the snare drum can actually produce a lot of different sounds. But unlike the guitar, you have no guide to help you find them. When you buy a snare drum head, it comes like this. Nothing on it. Nothing on it to help you find the locations of the best sounds so that you and that drum set sound great. Well, all of this has been a real challenge until now. Now you can get the Sweet Spot drum head. And with it, you'll get a diagram on your favorite drum head that will help you find and remember the locations of all the best sounds in your snare drum. With just a little bit of experimentation and practice, I'm sure you're going to be absolutely stunned on how much better you sound, regardless of the style of music that you're playing. So, at this point, let's have some fun. I'm now going to show you how you can use the Sweet Spot drum head to produce different snare drum sounds. As you have seen, the Sweet Spot drum head diagram looks like this. During the demonstrations, I'll be using this diagram on a Remo 14-inch ambassador-coated snare drum head. By the way, in addition to Remo, we can put the Sweet Spot drum head diagram on other company snare drum heads, including Evans and Aquarian. We'll talk more about ordering details later in this video. The first set of demonstrations will show different snare drum sounds using cross-sticking techniques. The blues, jazz, and reggae drummers should especially like this section. Referring to the diagram shown, I'm first going to show you a sound with the butt of the stick placed on spot 1 and the shaft over spot 3, and then another sound with the butt placed on spot 2 and the shaft over spot 3. As you just saw, the Sweet Spot drumhead diagram allowed me to find two dramatically distinct sounds. Now to demonstrate the great precision and ease with which I could play them, let's hear these two sounds in a simple drum beat using these same spots 1, 2, and 3. During the last demonstration, I used the traditional left-hand grip for cross-sticking. In this next demonstration, I will show you a new left-hand grip that I found while experimenting with the Sweet Spot drumhead. With this new grip technique, I found that I can hold and play the stick much easier. For this demonstration, we'll use spots 4, 5, and 6. Pay close attention to how critical spots 4 and 5 are in determining the different sounds. To emphasize this point, I'll move my use of spot 6 around a little bit, and you'll hear that the spots 4 and 5 sound difference remains the same. As you just saw, the Sweet Spot drumhead diagram enables a new cross-sticking technique that's just as effective and produces the same sounds as the traditional one. Now let's hear these two sounds with a new technique in a simple drum beat using the same spots, 4, 5, and 6. Moving on from the cross-sticking techniques, I'm now going to show you how you can get 10 different sounds from these 5 different sweet spots. I found these 5 spots on my snare drum by temporarily turning off the snare drum snares, and then hitting around the various circles on the sweet spot drum head with the drumstick. There's actually more spots, but to keep this presentation simple and demonstrate the important principles, we'll stick with these 5. Turning off the snares for this exercise is extremely important because it allows you to hear the sweet spots much more easily. By the way, you might ask, what is a sweet spot? Well, the answer is really simple. It's a sound you like. It's a sound that sounds good to you and is purely personal taste. But remember, whatever spots you select will produce the snare drum tones that your audience will hear at some distance away. So take your time and pick your sweet spots wisely. It's critically important to pick the spots and sounds that you feel match the styles of music that you plan to play. Put simply, you must find the right sounds for the right music. Now let's hear the 5 sweet spots that I've selected. To make the comparison easier, I'm going to demonstrate the different sounds using spot 1 as a reference. Listen carefully to how the drum's tone and other sound characteristics change as I progress through these sweet spots. Now let's turn the snares back on and do the following. For each of the 5 sweet spots, I'm actually going to produce 2 different sounds. On each sweet spot, the first 2 hits will be regular stick strikes, and the next 2 hits will be rim shots. Notice the much bigger and beautiful sounds that the rim shots produce. Well, there you have it. 10 different sounds from 5 different sweet spots. Now I know that some of you are watching this video on laptop or tablet type computers that do not have the audio fidelity to pick up on the subtle but important sound differences as I progress from sweet spots 1 to 5. So for you folks, let's repeat this last demonstration with only sweet spot 1 and sweet spot 5 back to back. This way you can clearly hear the starting and ending sound difference and recognize that the other sweet spots simply represent the sounds in between them. Now let's have some more fun and apply these 5 sweet spots to some simple beats. For each of these demonstrations, I'll identify the beat, the sweet spot selected, why I selected that sweet spot, and the drumstick hit technique I will use. The first beat will be the blues and/or jazz flat tire beat. I will use sweet spot 1 for this beat because I want a medium stick attack sound and little to no overtones coming from the snare drum. I'll use regular stick strikes on all hits. The next beat will be a simple dance beat. I'll use sweet spot 2 for this beat because I want a very sharp stick attack sound with little to no overtones. I'll use only rim shots with this beat. I typically use the spot 2 rim shot combination only if I'm playing in a very large room with no miking of my snare drum. This combination produces a very loud and powerful sound, and when used appropriately, creates an amazingly awesome backbeat. The next beat will be a rock beat. I'll use Sweet Spot 3 with this beat because I want a medium stick attack sound with small to medium overtones coming from the snare drum. I'll use mostly rim shots with this beat. The next beat will be a shuffle beat. I'll use Sweet Spot 3 with this beat because I want a medium stick attack sound with small to medium overtones coming from the snare drum. I'll use rim shots on beats 2 and 4 and regular stick strikes on all the ghost notes. The next beat will be a funk beat. I'll use Sweet Spot 4 with this beat because I want a medium stick attack sound with medium to large overtones coming from the snare drum. I'll use rim shots on beats 2 and 4 and regular stick strikes on the drum fill. The next beat will be a hip-hop funk beat. I'll use Sweet Spot 5 for this beat because I want a medium stick attack sound with maximum overtones coming from the snare drum. I'll use rim shots on beats 2 and 4 and regular stick strikes on the drum fill. Now that we've seen the sweet spots applied to different drum beats, some newer drummers may be wondering how they can learn to hit the selected sweet spots accurately and repeatedly in order to achieve a consistent sound. The following exercise may be able to help you. I call it the 6-pack. Basically, all you do is hit each of the 6 sweet spots 16 times with a single stroke roll. The trick is to go fast while moving to each sweet spot without letting your drumsticks hit each other. Start slowly and build your speed gradually. Go around these spots as many times as you like until you are satisfied with your speed and precision. Here's a brief example of this exercise. Even though I recommend the Sweet Spot drum head, there are some drummers who would prefer not to change their current drum head at this time. For these folks, we have a paper template that has the Sweet Spot drum head diagram printed on it. The paper template fits on top of a standard 14-inch snare drum head and provides a small dampening effect. To use the paper template, just put a piece of tape on it and remove any other sound dampeners from the drum and you're good to go. Here's a demonstration of the paper template. Final thoughts. For the professional drummers, I know I'm preaching to the choir. You guys already know how critical the snare drum sound is to any style of music. In fact, many of you have already addressed this issue by purchasing a wide variety of snare drums to achieve different sounds. For you folks, I think that using the sweet spot drum head makes sense because it can help you broaden the sound variations for each snare drum in your collection and help you fine-tune your playing for the perfect sound. Also, as you head into the various studios, your ability to instantaneously change your snare drum sound would be a significant asset as you try to find the optimal sound within these uniquely challenging acoustical environments. I've heard many sound engineers say that it's significantly better to record the right sound at the mic than it is to fix the sound electronically in the mix. At the end of the day, your ability to deliver a great sound quickly will enhance your reputation in the studio community, which will ultimately result in your securing much more work. For the mid-level drummers, since most of you folks may not be able to afford the multiple snare drums like the pros, doesn't it make sense to get the most sounds out of the snare drum you have? Well, the Sweet Spot drum head can transform your single workhorse snare into a sonic thoroughbred. Now that you folks have seen this video, I'm sure you see the value and will put the Sweet Spot drum head to good use. For the beginner, I'm sure that many of you are totally surprised that the snare drum can make so many sounds. I'm equally sure that you're surprised that it matters. Like yourself, I once thought that the sound of a snare drum was the sound of a snare drum, and all I needed to do was hit it someplace in time and everything would be fine. Well, clearly that's not true. The snare drum sound is critically important. In fact, the harsh reality is that you can't master the sound of your drum set until you master the sound of your snare drum. So experiment and practice with the Sweet Spot drum head and have fun with all the different sounds. Take lessons from teachers who can show you the best ways of using these sounds. If you do this, over time, your drum sound will become amazing, and you'll get more gigs and you'll have a lot more folks coming out and wanting to hear you play again and again. Mastering the snare drum sounds with a Sweet Spot drum head does take time, but it's tremendously satisfying and it's definitely worth the effort.
At the end of this video, you're going to see where you can buy the Sweet Spot drum head or the Sweet Spot drum head template. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that your use of the Sweet Spot drum head will let everybody hear what a great drummer you really are. Until next time.